this is Built for Jeeping. This behind me is my project vehicle for about 7 years. Bought it from a good friend of mine. It was just sitting in his uncle's backyard. His uncle bought it new off the lot. It's a 1987 Jeep Wrangler. It had the 2.5 liter 4-cylinder with the AX5 transmission, NP231 transfer case. 411 front and rear gears, Dana 30 in the front, Dana 35 in the rear. All stock, essentially. We believe it had a 2.5-inch lift on it, but it was not confirmed. There's no markings on it. There was rust all over everything. So I have no idea how much of a lift it actually has. One day I'll actually put my own lift on there and make it a little bit taller, because it's, as you can see, it's not very tall, and that's okay. My goal is not to have this be a super tall rock crawling rig or anything. Anyway, his intentions were to make a big crawler out of it. So he got all kinds of parts. He was working at Full Parts at the time. So he got all kinds of parts for it. As you can see, Smitty built front fenders. Those were necessary because of rust. It's got Smitty built rear quarters, also rusted out, so that covers up a lot of the rust. Now he did go back in there and he did repair the rust on that. I started working on the engine, making sure it was all fantastic. When I drained the oil actually had probably about 2 quarts of water underneath it. So when I opened up the drain plug on it, water just started pouring out. So it's like, okay, that tells me that this engine needs a lot of work. So drained the oil, got all the water out of it, dropped the oil pan, and just cleaned the whole thing on the inside because it needed it. But the big part was rust. As you know, older Jeeps, they're gonna have rust. They're gonna have all that kind of issue. And when it came down to it, the floor pans both were rusted out. The driver's side was really bad. The passenger side wasn't that bad, but it was right underneath the seat itself where it needed some repairs. So I decided to change out the floor pans. So went on Key Parts and got myself a new driver's side floor pan for the feet. Driver's side supports underneath the floor pan, the cross beam support, and the posterior support where it goes back towards the back of the Jeep. And I also picked up a posterior support for the passenger side as well. The top of that was easy. It's basically just flat metal, so I made that myself. Replaced all of that out and made it a lot better. It was not great because my welding is not the greatest, and it was poor sheet metal that was still not in the greatest shape. So it kind of looks like booger welds, but you know what? They're holding. It's clean-ish, and I painted them up, and it's no big deal. I decided to proceed with the frame swap. The rear frame right in front of the shackles was toast. So my concern was that as soon as I get it out there, hit a big bump, I mean, the holes were this big. I could put my fist in it and turn my fist around and not touch anything. So as soon as it hit a bump, the whole thing would just fail. But I decided at that point I needed to swap out the frame too. So started looking on Marketplace, and I found a few frames here and there, but they still needed some work on them. And then I found in Atlanta, this guy had a frame, and it was for a 4.0, so it was the inline 6, so I knew that the engine mounts would need to be moved. And I just happened to be going down there that weekend, and I got it for $200. Threw it in the back of the truck, tied it down, hunky-dory, everything's copacetic. It looked straight as an arrow. It had one little spot on it where you could tell that they had hooked it and bent the frame just a little bit around that hook, you know, kind of like it just hooked and pulled. I measured everything up. It is straight as an arrow. Brought it back, and then I started cleaning up the frame, swapping parts over, started with the engine, and that's when I dropped the oil pan, pulled the valve cover off of it, and really started getting things cleaned up on it. Put it all back together. I had some friends come over one day to swap the body. That was fun and interesting. I've got a big cherry picker, so I hooked it with the seat bolts, lifted the whole thing up. We dropped the old frame, let it drop to the ground, pulled it out of there, You could see that it was just in terrible shape. It could flex. It was rough. It would have broken in a heartbeat. Since I already had the axles and engine and everything swapped over to the new frame, we just rolled it up underneath. Now, I will say this, your cherry picker does great picking it up, but have somebody with a little bit of weight on the backside of it, because it was enough for the roll cage, windshield, tub, everything, that it started to tilt forward. It started to lift the back end of the cherry picker up. So my buddy, Jim, he's not a small guy. So it worked out well. He stood on the back of it and it stayed exactly where it needed to be. We rolled everything up under there. All of the mounts lined up beautifully. It was a great day. It worked very, very well. So got that finished up, remounted everything, started putting stuff back in it, and I started it. Hey, got everything running. It started right up, idled, drove it for a little while. You know, it was good. But the problem is it was a 4-cylinder in a Jeep. It was way underpowered. There's a hill near where I live, and the speed limit's 55, and the best that I could do was 35. Winding it out as hard as I possibly could in third gear. I probably could have shifted down to second, but then I would just been way up in the RPMs and RPMs, and that would have just, I think, would have damaged the engine just keeping going, because it's about a 2-mile hill. It was way too much. The heat from the engine working that hard burnt up the clutch fluid. It was just telling me this is not enough. And at that point I decided, hey, let's swap out the engine. I looked at a few options. I debated going diesel, the old Mercedes diesel, OM617, I do believe is what it was called. Debated doing that. Everybody said that it gets a little bit better gas mileage than the 4.0, but performs like the 4.0. It's smooth, it's got good torque. Debated doing a Volkswagen diesel out of a Jetta. Debated doing a Chevy V6, because the 4.3 V6, I'm familiar with them somewhat, and they perform well. You know, they got up and go with a little GMC Safari van. Why couldn't it get up and go with this too? But I just couldn't find any. And everybody does V8s. Everybody does V8s, but it's the right engine choice a lot of times, and it works out for a lot of people. Well, I was searching around and I found a Vortec V8 5.3 liter that was pulled from a truck. Guy said that it did have a little knock to it. I was prepared to accept what it was, because it was only $300. Picked it up and brought it back, hooked it up to the cherry picker, cleaned it up as best I could, and I started disassembling. And by the time I got it disassembled, I found that the crank was absolutely toast. And I can actually show you, I got the crank sitting right there. So I found out that it was absolutely toast. You could kick at it, you could feel it, you could see, oh God. You could see that it was just worn in. Those bearings ate into this crank. So it's rough shape. So I decided, let's call a friend. And I've got some friends that they've built engines over the years, and I told him what it was doing. He said, honestly, it sounds like you need to do a full rebuild. So that's what I started doing. So I sourced a remanufactured crank that was back to specs. Started measuring out the cylinders. They measured just fine, and there was still some cross hatching on it. So the cylinders themselves were good. I think, when I took it to the machine shop, because that's what I eventually had to do to fix the block itself, they looked at it and said, man, everything looks good, but you need a line hone and bore. It's like, okay, what is that? Well, where the bearings ate into the crank, it also ate into the block as well. So they completely fixed that. They lined up all of the pistons on it as well, and bored and line honed all of the connecting rods. So all of those are back to spec. They put together the heads for me. I could have done that, but they went ahead and lapped the valves, reconnected them, put the new springs on, the new rockers on. So it's like, I can't complain about that. And the total price was only like $500. A new crank, which was another $200 and something. And the cam was just fine. Cam lobes were just fine, no problems with that at all. So I just reinstalled the cam and put new bearings in the cam, of course. Cam bearings were new. Machine shop put those in for me. So ultimately I have this rebuilt engine, and I put it all back together myself. Made sure, used the plastic gauge, made sure that the connecting rods were spec'd out correctly for the bearings, made sure that the cam bearings were good. I double checked those after they put them in at the machine shop, of course. Made sure that the cylinders were round, nothing out of round with them. Threw it all back together. Started working on wiring, started working on getting all the little things to hook up to the engine. And I tell you what, wiring is just not my forte. And the engine harness had so much to it. And I was really concerned that the ECU that came with it was bad. I was concerned that I was going to do something wrong with the wiring, so I opted to go simple. I actually swapped it out with the carburetor. Got myself a Jegs intake that matches up to the Vortec V8. You know, they have a different bolt pattern that goes into the heads. Matched it up to that, and started trying to source a carburetor. I had a couple of friends. One gave me a little Holley carburetor, needed to be rebuilt. Started to rebuild it, stripped screws on it, the whole thing broke. The whole big deal. One of my acquaintances that he had an AFB Carter carb. He let me have that, and I started going through it and cleaning it up, and I just happened to have a patient that works for Holley. And I was telling him about it, and he said, actually, you know what? You give me the part number on that Holley, and I'll see if I can get you some discounts on the parts. I was like, okay, cool. So emailed that to him. He emailed me back and said, hey, I've got something for you. If you just want to pay for shipping, I'll let you have it. And it's a quick fuel 650 carburetor, brand spanking new. He had it as a display just sitting on his shelf. So he said, hey man, throw some WD-40 down in the bowls, make sure everything's nice and lubricated, and it should perform well for you. So that's what I did, and got it on there. Then I started working on getting the rest of it. I sourced a transmission. The transmission I sourced was an SM465, old granny low 4-speed. Picked that up, rebuilt it. You know, had a lot to do with that as well. It was a pain in the butt because you have to have a certain tool to get everything torqued down on the tail end of it. I didn't have that tool, so I made it. I think it was like $350. It's more than I spent on the transmission itself. I wasn't going to spend that. So I made the tool, put it all together, put it on the engine, and that gave me the ability to torque it down to the spec that I needed it. It's fantastic. The transmission may have been just fine, but I tell you what, it needed to be cleaned out too. It was sitting, it had rust in it, and all of the parts and pieces needed to be replaced. Well, I bought the rebuild kit for it, and done, easy. The transfer case that I had originally bought with the first transmission, which I didn't tell you that. The first transmission I bought was an NV 3500. Yeah, NV 3500. Those transmissions are not as strong as I would have liked. And this one, when I first tested it, grabbed the tail shaft, spun it, awesome. No big deal at all, great. Put it in all the gears, no big deal. By the time I got it home and was ready to start installing it, it was toast. There were pieces and parts that were inside of the transmission that didn't catch when I rolled it over the first time, and now they're catching. Took it to a transmission shop, and they said, well, it's going to be about $1,700 to rebuild this transmission. I said, what? He said, yep, they require a special tool to align everything, and we'll have to purchase that tool in order to do it right. I'm not spending that. So that transmission went toast. The transfer case I kept. It was in good shape. I cracked open the case myself on that one and opened it up, and everything looks good. Cleaned it up, kind of refurbished the little plastic pads for the shift patterns. Fantastic. It did great. I knew that length was going to be an issue, so I also got myself a slip yoke eliminator. So put that on the back of it while I was rebuilding it. Man, everything's perfect on that. It's great. Once I mounted the engine, the transmission, and the transfer case on there, it all lined up perfectly. I tell you, I have gotten so lucky with this swap over. The only downfalls are my own inept abilities. You know, I don't know how to do everything, so I'm learning as I go. Ultimately, it's been great. A buddy of mine, he made the engine mounts for me. Well, I take that back. He welded the engine mounts for me. I made them. It is a C-channel that goes over the frame itself, and then I welded a tube that goes up to a plate that mounts the original manufacturer's engine mounts. So easy parts to find, right? And then I made some fins that go through it and make it a little bit stronger. He welded them up for me, and then next thing I know, he's painting them yellow. The Jeep is maroon and black, and I have yellow engine mounts. So, you know what? I'm going to keep him. He did the work. He gets to pick the color. But those worked out well, too. Once I got everything lined up, you know, the carburetor, you want it to have a slight tilt backwards. It's perfect. You know, it's absolutely perfect. I could not ask for things to get better on it. So I got my wiring kit, and I've been working on that. That's where I'm at right now. I'm finishing that up. The wiring kit's just a standard little universal wiring kit from Amazon. I can't remember the name of the company, but essentially it's the same exact one as the Easy Wire kit. Even the instructions say Easy Wire. So the Easy Wire kit was a little bit more expensive. This one was a little bit less expensive, and I've gone through, and it's all properly labeled. The connections look great. Nothing's loose. I've been able to wire everything up, so now I've got everything routed. I've got like 3 sensors left to wire up, and that's it. My dash is a fully custom-made double D fabrication out of Pennsylvania dashboard. He laser cuts and welds them together for you, sends it in the raw metal. You can customize it. He'll send you the PDFs and everything, so you can take a look at it, make sure it looks good. I had him put some holes in there for all of my switches, all my gauges. Everything's exactly where I need it to be. I've put bulkhead connectors on all of those, so it's plug and play. You know, wiring everything up so that it's literally just plug it in and go. As far as hearing it, I got to finish the exhaust too. Right now it's just open header. Actually, no, technically it's not open header. I've got the Y pipe underneath, but there's no exhaust to it. It's just a pipe. I picked up a Dynomax Super Turbo. I didn't want to have it stupid loud. Could I absolutely make it stupid loud? Yes, absolutely. But I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted it to be somewhat subdued, you know, making it to where it has a nice burble to it, but not just ungodly. So, you know, that's something I've got to make as well, and I'll weld it up and show you guys how I'm doing that too. Again, I am not a professional, and I never will claim to be. These are all just how I'm doing things and how I'm making things work on a budget. I'm sure in some of my videos later on you'll be able to hear I'm on a budget. I keep things on a budget, and it's because we all have budgets every day. We have a normal everyday life that we got to take care of. So why not just do it on a budget, make it work, do it with these own 2 hands, and show you guys how to do it as well with your hands. And again, not a professional. I may not do everything exactly the right way, but I'm learning along the way with you guys. So this is my 1987 Jeep Wrangler project, and I'm sure there's more that I've forgotten, but that's okay. We'll see them we'll see everything as we go. Later, taters.
Make sure to like and subscribe.